back and ready to go with match number 1 today, and it's going to be BloodTrail versus DawN, and it's going to be Warrior versus Druid. And I mentioned earlier, or we mentioned earlier, that DawN is doing very, very well at the top of Division B right now, whereas BloodTrail is actually just 2-4, so not terrible. Yeah, win here or a couple of wins over this weekend could even up that score and look very good for him. Let's check out the deck list as well. See what these players have brought. Let's check out DawN's Token Druid, because it is not the Token Druids we've seen over the past few weeks.
Oh, definitely not. It's got more of that mech package, which we have seen floating around on ladder prior to last week, but with the addition of Snip Snap to the meta, it seems like it's definitely gotten a buff. So what's different about it is that it's including Mecharoos and Microtech Controller in place of cards like Mark of the Loa. And they've also got Sea Giant in DawN's list, which is a bit of a greedier package, but I'm not exactly sure what DawN was trying to hit, because I feel like Token Druid as a concept probably is good against Rogue, but then cards like Forest Aid and Sea Giant are probably not that great unless you're running into exactly the Water Rogue or the rogues that try to go wider on board.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing with Sea Giant is even if you get it procced yourself, as in just from more or less just your own minions, you make it cheap enough to play, then it's just one big threat instead of just AoE wiping you out every single time. So I quite like the Sea Giant inclusions. I think with the deck now, it can afford to go a little bit slower, but we'll see how it does going up against BloodTrail's Warrior that we can take a look at right now, because this is what it has to be, at least match number 1. DawN has a rogue in the form of Glory a little bit later on this weekend, but for now, that's the Bomb Warrior. And how's this going to line up versus Druid? Because I feel like Warrior does pretty well in general. There's a card called Warpath that exists.
Yes, that directly counters that power card from Druid called Soul of the Forest. Although maybe with the double Forest Aid inclusion, that could be a little bit better for DawN. And honestly, I've not had the time to test how the whole mech package lines up against Warrior, but that could be very useful because it can deny some of their Dynamatics.
Yeah, and then one thing, as we've seen, both decks are running Snip Snap. I'll just quickly break down for you what that does. You can see it on the screen now, but it's a 3-mana 2/3. It has Magnetic and Echo, so that means that even on an empty board you can either go wide, say with 9 mana, or you can play 3 stacked on top of each other to make a 6/9 with Death Rattle, summon all the microbots as well. So what this does is, one, it's a Death Rattle that creates more tokens in Token Druid, for example, which is obviously very useful, but also it's a 1-card board. Because even when I've been playing it in various decks, I find myself going wide with it just to create 3 of them late game, and it's a 1-card commitment to almost generate a board twice, which is a very, very powerful effect. And then you look at it in Warrior, well, if your opponents are playing more aggressive minions or smaller minions or tokens, well, having your own tokens that kill their tokens is actually pretty good as well, along with all the mechs that Warrior can use to actually magnetize the Snip Snap onto and make even bigger minions to maybe big swings late game. So I feel like that one card, it's the one new card we've got for this buff patch, and I think it's very flexible and very powerful in itself.
I would absolutely agree. Talking to a lot of pro players, it seems like the common consensus so far that Snip Snap is just a good card. Like, even if you're not running any mech package, you could just play it on 3 as it's the only mech in your deck and it would still be pretty useful. And so you're going to see that in certain decks which don't even have any other mechs this weekend. And so now DawN queuing up. Of course, both players on their primary first, and he's got the Acorn Bearer in the opening hand, which is a good way to start off, but it's really rough when you don't see something like Whispering Woods or Dreamway Guardians to follow up.
Yeah, this is one of the drawbacks of just adding a few extra late game threats into the deck, or maybe even early game threat, depending on how wide the board gets. But look at the hand now. Soul of the Forest is fantastic, but then Sea Giant and then Archmage Vargoth, and now Libidinous Floop, a card we didn't talk about much. But when there are these cards that generate tokens and generate mechs and so on, and even Archmage Vargoth, having a second one to play and follow up with is very powerful. So DawN is off to a very slow start, but he does have some very good power plays that maybe he doesn't need to go super fast.
Yes, and he has drawn something to do this turn, even though it's off curve. I do expect that we'll be seeing the Dreamway Guardians, and BloodTrail had the double Warpath in his opening hand, and I'm sure he's very, very chilling out just seeing that. I mean, that's... How can you be worried in this matchup when you got that?
Yeah, it's definitely chilling for DawN anyway, because he has to go up against this, because it's not only double Warpath, the Weapons Project, Militia. I'm just going to name every card in BloodTrail's hand
Okay.
because they're all good versus Druid right now. And the positive thing, at least for DawN, is you look at Snip Snap, you look at even a Flabinida's Floop Snip Snap, as well as the Microtech. These at least don't get hard killed by Dynamatic. So there's that level of defense, but the problem is you get hard killed by every other card in BloodTrail's hand. So already DawN has some quite the hill to climb right now to get a win here.
Yep. Vargoth, of course, very powerful when you are able to stick it and go into buff. So if the Vargoth can stay on board and then he can land Soul of the Forest, that could potentially be very powerful. However, it seems like BloodTrail could potentially answer this if he gets something like a Shield Slam.
Does have the shield block to go, but nothing else. The one good thing, or the powerful thing, at least in my opinion, about Vargoth, and we're seeing it more and more in other minions, especially cards like Thunderhead, where just a 4 mana, 6 health minion is often quite difficult to kill. And even if you've got the minions to trade into it, the attack is even just enough early game to actually kill off a few minions. So it's kind of like a semi-taunt minion a lot of the time. But now DawN just has full health Vargoth, but he could go for the Soul of the Forest. The double normally isn't mind-blowing, but on a board of just 2 minions, it actually is, because they go off twice. One of the problems is with double Soul of the Forest on a wide board is there's no space to go off twice. But I think this might be the turn where you just play it, you know?
Yeah, it seems good. I mean, the alternative being Snip Snap on turn 5 is not too great. I guess the benefit is that you get Snip Snap as the flooped minion, but he won't quite have the mana to go double Snip Snap next turn. I quite like the Soul of the Forest now.
With Sea Giant in hand as well. That's how you get your wide board to get an early Sea Giant down. And that's not a minion that dies to Warpath that often.
At the very least, this disincentivizes BloodTrail from trying to deal with the entire board. When the ordering from DawN here is quite good. So now the Squirrel will get the second Soul of the Forest as well.
Nice small plays there that really make a big impact. It's just maximizing the board state. And now BloodTrail very quickly has to work out whether he wants to commit a Warpath, but it would only be a 2 swing Warpath, if you want to phrase it like that. So it wouldn't actually do that much. You might have to go for Dynamatic here.
Light the fuses!
And this could, in most outcomes, just creates way more treants.
And it didn't even do much, as you can see.
Actually,
it's like...
it might have been a positive outcome for BloodTrail there that he didn't clear the Vargoth, because that would have spawned 2 more treants on it. And then any one board buff would be quite scary for him.
It would, but it's a Vargoth.
That's
and
true.
What if DawN just plays cards this turn, or spells, should I say specifically? Instead, he has gone for the Sea Giant, so at least it's not getting Vargoth value. But this trade means Vargoth's safe for another turn, unless BloodTrail commits removal. And there isn't really removal that deals with the Vargoth and the Sea Giant is the problem here, because BloodTrail is not running executes. So there isn't even Warpath execute, and that's just, you know, gonna go for it.
This is the first time I've seen the Sea Giant and Floop interaction, to be honest, but DawN had the option at one point there to play a 0 mana 3/4, which seemed like a pretty good deal, but I suppose he's saving it for the Snip Snap later on, so that he has something solid to do on turn 7 guaranteed, and then roll into the Forest 8 turn. And BloodTrail already faced with this awkward board, which the Token Druid needs to develop in order to challenge the Warrior, which is something tall and as well as a little bit of width.
And this is really nuts, isn't it? Because next turn could even just be Mecharoo, Snip Snip, and then into one big minion. So even if the Sea Giant's killed, which it probably doesn't die this turn, just obviously we've got to see what BloodTrail does, then you just have another big minion and it's a mech. So it can't be Dynamatic either for an easy kill. It's actually kind of nutty.
Yeah.
I'm being brought round to Token Druid for the first time since rotation.
Yeah. BloodTrail here, he's looking at the Skater bot, and popping the Vargoth here means that any board buff is now very, very threatening. Oh, wow.
Ooh.
I'm kind of in favor of catching a Savage Roar while you can get the 10 damage.
Is that 24? So it put BloodTrail to 12. Well, the good thing is there a reason to do anything else this turn? If you Savage Roar, put him to 12, well, there's actually the Forest Aid the turn after.
Yeah,
he can still play these minions,
yes,
of course, because he
yeah,
can play this and Savage Roar.
Exactly.
But I don't see the reason not to Savage Roar. He's going to go for a bigger Snip Snap instead.
Okay.
But the problem is a Brawl can dramatically reduce your board size down, and he does. BloodTrail does run 2 of them.
But I guess DawN is thinking even if a Brawl comes out, he's still most likely going to end up with 4 1/1s. And he could have the option to Forest 8 if he sees a Warpath alongside that Brawl. And if he doesn't, he could use the Savage Roar still for 10 damage on the 4 1/1s.
And I guess through Brawl, if either of the big guys wins, fine. Like, DawN's actually probably not too upset.
Yeah.
So 2 out of 5 outcomes are actually just fine.
I mean, DawN just set up a catch-22 situation for BloodTrail, and BloodTrail doesn't even have the Brawl in hand to possibly answer that. And even if he did, DawN's got the contingency plan. It's pretty amazing how he was able to curve out.
Yeah.
Just from sticking the Wargoth.
Yeah, it's huge. And the Sea Giant coming in clutch, right? And this is why I really like Sea Giant Druid. And honestly, one of the reasons why I think Druid was not working that well for Chonsu, because Chonsu wasn't running Sea Giants, right? And it's just, you're just missing that one big just threat in itself.
13 plus 6 is 9. That
Well, there's a swipe as well.
It's 19, yeah. That looks like lethal to me.
It really does. There's the Savage Roar. The swipe as the extra damage from hand as well. And that is going to do it. That was just impressive. Double warp. We started this game by saying BloodTrail has every card in his hand that he needs to just clear out Druid. But Snip Snap, the new legendary that everyone has, you just get it by logging in, by the way. So if you've not logged in and got it yet, literally just log into Hearthstone. It's that easy.
Too.
Yeah, it's golden. It's easy. But with the help of Snip Snap and also the Sea Giant, it was absolutely huge. And when you start to pile some of these power plays, it gets to the point where outside of making tokens, all the other cards in your deck are big power plays and threats that your opponent has to deal with. So it's pretty scary, pretty impressive list for me. It's only one game I've seen, but still.
Aside from that, I would say just the Vargoth sticking onto 4, and despite the Soul of the Forest not hitting too many minions, the fact that it was stacked so that the Vargoth had 2 on it, and then 2 smaller minions had 1 Death Rattle on it, that just created such an awkward board state that the Warrior was not equipped to deal with. So very strong showing from DawN there, and we were ragging on Token Druid a lot last week, but maybe for this week might be the nuts.
It might be, but I think it's because in Asia Pacific we've got a lot of warriors over here this week. But I think with the beefier builds, especially with the help of Snip Snap, like I said, it's like a 1-card either board fill or big guy creation, and the Sea Giants, there are states where Warrior just doesn't have enough damage in the right shapes to actually deal with the board. Obviously, Vargoth on 4 landing into a Soul of the Forest on something is fantastic and awkward to deal with for any single class in the game. But still, you build your deck to do those things. There wasn't even really the flute used, so it's you know, to any kind of extreme level that I'm sure it could be in the deck if you go Vargoth again, so you get double spells, which would be insane. But I believe both players are sticking to their primary list. We're going to be going straight into the game as soon as possible, and this is interesting to me though.
I would agree.
DawN's sticking on his primary list, which I do like the list. I like it. But his tertiary deck has double Tending Tauren, a Tree Speaker, and 2 Force of Nature.
On paper, it looks like this is the deck to beat Warrior, because we saw from Chonsu last week, and I would classify him as a Token Druid expert by now, having brought it for 2 weeks.
0-4 Token Druid expert?
I mean, a Token Druid loyalist, let's call it
there we
that.
go, that's better.
And the fact that he switched to his tertiary when he was faced with the Bomb Warrior matchup makes me think that the trees are meant to deal with the bombs, but DawN's saying, no, I'm going to stick with the mechs, and I guess maybe this type of sideboard is meant for a different matchup we're just not accounting for, because the meta has changed a lot, guys. People are considering things like Murloc Shaman. Like we can see from DawN's secondary list, he's got Hungry Crabs in there, but that's not actually been into the field. So what people are actually bringing in their specialist lineups is not necessarily meant for just what we see this week.
Yeah, exactly. Because one thing, you know, we mentioned the lack of Paladin Holy Wrath style in Asia Pacific this weekend, but for me, I'm a little bit surprised that no one just tried the Get 'em Mech Paladin, where you just stack a ton of mechs up and go, because of the help of just certain cards being buffed and added in. It makes the deck pretty powerful, but also a bit one-dimensional. So we've seen a lot of players tech into their sideboards the silence effects from Spellbreakers, Iron Beak Owls, and so on. But BloodTrail doesn't have any of that anyway. He's just happy that his warrior can get the job done regardless. My worry is he had a really good hand. Well, both players had good hands, and DawN won. So if your reliance is on you having a good hand and your opponent not having a good hand, well, that's a scary thing if you're relying on that to win you a game.
Yeah, I do think it's oversimplifying it a little bit, because the general good hand from Token Druid is something like Whispering Woods into board buff, which is what the good hand from Warrior can directly counter with just one card like Warpath. But it was that really the Vargoth, I think, that was the X factor from the Druid, in which the Warrior does not have a direct answer except a shield block on curve, which a shield slam, sorry.
Yeah.
You saw that BloodTrail had the shield block, but not the answer for the high health minion.
Yeah, I think what was missing from, or one of the issues is the brawl, or the lack of brawl, because if Vargoth, even if he hadn't have sold the forest twice with the Vargoth, if he had done any other buff, well, Warpath wouldn't have done enough damage to clear the board anyway, so it was a rough same issue to compound it. But let's just go straight into game number 2. Both players on exactly the same deck, so primary for both. And DawN getting off to a decent start again. This Acorn Bearer is just such a sick card for turn 1, because even if it's cleared, you gain tokens to play, and if it's not cleared, it's pushing to a turn.
Yeah, it's really great, especially since it also has synergy with cards like Whispering Woods, because once it's cleared, then you get more cards in your hand to buff that card. And DawN choosing to play off-curve the Mekaru instead of going for hero power, which I like a lot because he's got buff cards in hand.
And now this is a bit of a tricky turn here. DawN has to either choose to deal with this Alec or not. If he does, though, it's either a hero power or a coin swipe. Both of those don't feel fantastic.
Yeah. I'm kind of looking at Forest Aid and Go Face, but again, I don't have that much experience on this deck. But he's actually going for the Soul of the Forest here, and I think this is a nod to having the Blessing of Ancients in hand, because once BloodTrail starts dealing with these minions, DawN can do something similar to what he did last game, which is play out a squirrel and then buff the board.
Yeah, it looks like that's going to be the case. The Wrench Caliber from BloodTrail is helping him really keep a better handle on this game than the previous one, obviously without Archmage Vargoth. The damage is much easier to deal with, and also the double benefit of shuffling in more bombs.
So DawN here, I think the draw of the second Blessing of Ancients is what made this turn very clear to him. I was thinking maybe he could try and take it slow and go for a hero power clear there. But I think with this many board buffs, if you don't use them right away, you're going to end up in a situation which many Token Druid players are familiar with, which is all the buff cards in hand and no board to buff. So I like that he catches it out there and not being too greedy.
And yeah, when he's effectively got 4 Blessing of Ancients in hand, he's like, just cast them when you can, just get the value. Already though, this is looking much, much better for BloodTrail. And just having the weapon locked in so you can get the double swings out of it. And when you've got this kind of weapon live, it's almost guaranteed to kill 2 minions in Token Druid outside of the Giants. So it's looking pretty good. This is where it dries up a little bit, BloodTrail's hand, but Omega Assembly can be used early game. It really isn't something you need as value in this matchup. You just need to focus on not getting killed.
Quite good draw for DawN off the top there, having something to buff onto the board, but BloodTrail has just been drawing answer after answer, and it's not even the wide clears that he might have needed for something like a Whispering Woods board, but just the individual minions and weapons that can get rid of 1 minion at a time. It's the perfect answer for the type of hand that DawN has at the moment. Can even magnetize the Ziliax onto the Rover here.
I wonder whether you don't. I guess you get the heal.
Yeah,
I was wondering whether the multiple attacks was worse since the Ziliax trades into one anyway, but the Ziliax would get traded into by the 2-3, which is the break point, I guess.
Right.
But you don't always want to magnetize Ziliax, is my point overall, but this time looks pretty good.
Yeah, it can be something you do out of habit, and it's good to see that BloodTrail hesitated for a minute to see if it was really better, but I think in that case it made a lot of sense because the 1-3 wouldn't have been able to kill a minion on its own. And now BloodTrail is basically up to full health again, and DawN, nothing to do that's great on turn 7, but at least he's got the Forest Aid into another board buff coming up for later.
Oh, 2 Clockwork Goblins is actually pretty sick.
Yeah.
BloodTrail can always go for the Omega Assembly first anyway, if he wants to. But just having just 2 minions to throw out against Token Druid when DawN only has 1 sitting on the board right now is actually pretty nuts.
My question here is whether he wants to rip the Omega Assembly for less value. He already played the first one. And it's getting to that point in the late game where BloodTrail has had a very, very clean and smooth early game that now he's probably thinking the way I lose here is if I don't have enough answers for things like the Forest Aid later on in the game. Okay. So I like that he holds on to the Mega Assembly. Just the 3/3s here challenge the 2/3 really well, and he can probably just go for 1 more answer per turn and then roll into turn 10 and get the full value off of that.
Yeah, you know what? I guess with this play as well, he can always reevaluate next turn and say, oh, well, maybe I just cast Omega Assembly next turn if he's in dire need of something to do. But yeah, I think you're right, actually. Holding on here I think just feels a little bit better. Shield block, not half bad. With a shield slam, can kill off this giant with the help of a Clockwork Goblin. And even equip the Wrench Caliber.
Yeah, it works out quite cleanly with that draw. I was going to say, does he really want to spend 7 damage with the armor up and then 3 damage into it? But now he's got something to do with his mana and then deal the perfect amount of damage into the Sea Giant.
Oh, I meant to yeah. And to just not need to float.
Exactly, because he's got the Wrench Caliber. So BloodTrail, I think, is feeling pretty confident right here. And he's actually going for clearing off the mechs, I believe.
Yes.
I was looking at clearing off the 2/3 with your 3/3 and then the squirrel, but doing it this way denies Snip Snap having charge.
Yeah, it's going to be a...
Oh, okay, never mind.
So I guess it denies the board refill from having Snip Snap. Because if he just stacks Snip Snap onto the mech with Death Rattle, then if he kills it, the board fills. Whereas now it's just slightly less. I don't know. I think I would have liked to see the mechs completely cleared.
It's quite close, yeah. But yeah, now BloodTrail, he has this Brawl to answer the first Forest's Aid. Oh, and now he can snip. I wonder if he wants to just play 3 separate Snip Snaps.
I think so. Because he can kill with this Wrench Caliber. So the problem here is you might think, oh, just Brawl. Well, if he brawls, he knows there's a second one coming down, so he's in exactly the same spot, but -1 Brawl. So I think I like triple snip.
Yeah, I quite like that too.
Is he stacking it? Huh.
So I think what the stack plays around is DawN having a single buff, and then he can like double trade. He can value trade over the separate Snip Snaps. In which case your Brawl gets worse because you already have your Death Rattles onto the board.
Sure.
So I kind of like the 1 stack and 1 separate, because it disincentivizes DawN from trading onto the stacked one, in which case your Brawl gets rewarded later on, I think.
Interesting, because all I was thinking was if the trades happen, then all your tokens just kill off the minions anyway. So I guess it's which one you lean into, right?
Yeah.
This is adding up to a lot of damage. Though.
Really complicated turns, but these guys are playing at lightning pace. I don't mean this turn from DawN is complicated, because this makes a lot of sense. But the last one from BloodTrail, I think there was quite a lot he could have considered. So now he can rep the Omega Assembly for full value.
Oh, Brawl into the underpowered Steam. Unpowered.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, underpowered. Needs a buff. That's next on the buff list, Blizzard.
Okay, you heard it here first, guys. And I was going to say Harvest Golem is pretty much strictly worse than Snip Snap. Not strictly, but very close. Now, he gets to fill up the board and probably play this underpowered Steam bot. I mean, such a bully, Raven. This card is so good here. It's going to like heal him for 9.
If it was that good, it would be in the deck.
But it's good here. Yeah, but the real problem for BloodTrail is he doesn't quite have the cleanest answer for the next Forest Aid. Although he's got a ton of minions, he's just hoping he doesn't see the other swipe here.
Yeah, I mean, BloodTrail can go aggressive now. Outside of there being a swipe, next turn, BloodTrail can just trade 1 minion in, play Boom Reaver. Whatever minion it summons has Rush, so he can take down something himself, and then set up lethal, basically. And this is the power of Snip Snap and why you're seeing mechs in more Token Druids now, because suddenly there's just something that can kill this 0-9, which is pretty incredible. And now it's all down to BloodTrail to defend against, you know, just a 9-12.
There's still quite a few bombs left in the deck because there was double Wrench Caliber played and double Clockwork Golem, so BloodTrail is, I think, feeling like he might want to put DawN at 10 at least so he gets to that
Yeah.
break point. It's not like he's dealing with this
I
9-12.
was going to say, if he went face with everything, he only puts him to 6, which is an infuriating health to put him to. But I think he might have to drop this Boom Reaver. Oh, he's not going to? Huh.
The Boom Reaver, I
Shoot.
don't think there are any natural taunts left in the deck because Ziliax has been played. So I don't think the Boom Reaver would have actually helped
I
him
guess.
defend against this 9-12. Instead, he goes wide on the board to try and answer the next threats that DawN puts down. But I'm not sure, maybe the Boom Reaver, it gets traded on board by the 9-12, so if your plan is to try and stick something, and I think he had a pretty clear read that there was no swipe last turn, then this board state is maybe a little bit better against that. Players very tense here, being forced to trade because BloodTrail put just enough to threaten lethal
Now
there.
there's 1 damage away from lethal.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
Mega Devastator.
So between that and Shield Slam, he can clear quite a lot of this, and because of the board space, DawN won't get all of the 1-1s from the Snip Snap.
Yeah, so here he will want to Omega Devastator the Snip Snap Microbot first. And now it gets really funny because it's like, how many do you trade versus how much do you try and set up lethal?
I guess he can be aware of the Savage Roar breakpoints, so him being at 16 here, the maths, it's too quick for me, Raven.
They are playing awfully quickly.
So if the maximum he can trade off is just 1 more of these Treants, in which
2
case...
more, right? Because he has the
Oh yeah,
Harvest
sorry,
Golem
sorry.
still.
Yeah, the Harvest Golem. So in that case, there will be still 4 left on board, and then Savage Roar is another 6, plus the Hero Power is 10, so he'd actually be safe. If he doesn't trade though, then I think he's dead to Savage Roar.
He would have been safe from 3, right? Because it would have been 12, 14, 15 with Hero Power, so it would have been Savage Roar plus a buff would have killed him.
Yeah, you're
so
right,
he
you're
could
right.
have pushed a little bit more damage, but that would have been a little bit more risky because here it would be 10. It would only be 13 if it was Savage Roar plus 1 buff.
Right.
So I think this is much safer, way more often than it is threatening or setting up lethal by putting 2 more damage. You already have lethal set up anyway, outside of a Hero Power.
Looks good. Some quick maths from BloodTrail there, and he did play around 2 cards instead of just 1, and managed to not give up a winning position anyway. And for DawN, now we see that he's got no choice but to refill here, I think, and probably leave the Devastator up. I don't think he can afford to give up the Savage Roar.
Free your mind from
And from the Warrior, I don't think there's any burst from hand left because Ziliax was played and double Wrench Caliber as well. So I don't actually see a reason that DawN needs to trade here unless I'm missing something. Because something like Weapons Project would give him armor anyway.
Yeah, well it would be a magnetized minion from Omega Assembly, right?
Both were used, but yeah, he hasn't seen this last one, so it could be that, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wow, this is a really tense spot here. If he plays the Boom Reaver, I don't see anything that he particularly wants to rush that could also keep him safe. At most, it could clear 1 more minion, which doesn't seem too relevant in the face of Savage Roar. Okay, so if he clears 6 worth of damage, which is the most given that the Boom Reaver gets something big. Or maybe he just won't do it because I'm wasting all my time considering all these things when the players can get it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing here basically is this is one of the scrappiest endings of a game. Was that second Savage Roar?
And I don't think he needed it, did he? Or,
I didn't count, but it doesn't matter because the game's over. Second Savage Roar definitely seals the deal no matter what. But yeah, that was such a scrappy game, and it's definitely one where I'm not saying anyone made dramatic misplays or anything to that extent, but I feel like that game is definitely one you can watch back and think, oh, what if I did this?
Yeah.
And how would have this just changed the way the game was played out? Boom Reaver could have come down earlier on turns where there wasn't as much done, and again, I'm not saying Boom Reaver was correct, but it would have put 2 minions on the board, and one of them's quite large, minimum one of them's quite big. Yes, there's one who get rush and maybe smaller, but maybe there was potential card draw he could have gotten or anything else that would have helped out. So Tons of questions there for that one.
Yeah, I think at the very end there, we saw BloodTrail play really fast, but I think he did make the right call in the end, because even if he pulled something from the Boom Reaver that was able to remove one more minion from DawN, I think he was still dead to one Savage Roar. So in that case, there was no point playing around it, and instead he tried to get the lethal by putting another bomb into the deck. And there are quite a few for DawN at that point, so it was a really close game. I'm just shocked at how fast it played out. I guess they did a lot of practice and have already memorized all the damage cutoffs.
Yeah, and DawN with that going up to 6-1 so far, only dropping one match all throughout Grandmasters, and also probably annoyed Chansu with DawN just rocking up with Druid and be like, yeah, 2-0. It's just as easy as that, isn't it? But that's it for match number 1 is done for the day, and we have got Patra versus Glory coming up, which is going to be Warrior versus Rogue. We're going to step away while we set the match up, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.